Hi there, I'm Jeff, and this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Matt's on vacation, and so we're taking an old talk of his from a few years back, and we're cutting it up into 5 parts. Today is part 4, so if you missed any of the previous ones, you might want to go back and check those out. This is a talk he did on Matthew chapter 5, and it corresponds a lot with Jesus' perspective on the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. So we'll play a little music, and we'll jump right back in.
Matthew 5:17. Don't think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I haven't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. He's added a new element to the definition of the relationship between God and humans, and it's Him. This is revolutionary. And the reason we're not all freaking out is because we're comfortable with it and we're used to it. Because we've heard this revolutionary thing for years and years and years and years. But people at this time had not. They had not figured out what it might look like for God to fulfill the law and do what He needed to do next. And in this moment, the buzz on this hillside, when He said this, I guarantee you, was off the charts. You know what it's like when we're together, or you're with a group of people or whatever, and something clicks, and it works, and there's that moment of epiphany, or a really good storyteller leads you here, and then, oh, and you're startled and amazed. You've been in places where that happens with more than one person at once. Imagine that, but the most ever. The biggest question in all of history is spoken to by God in the flesh in this moment. Not everybody in the world would have got this at this point. He was speaking to an audience rooted in the Old Testament history who would read between the lines and get it. But He's going to go on to clarify. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Oh, okay. Great. So the law still applies, whether we're talking about the commands of God, whether we're talking about the Old Testament story of God. And what he's hitting on here is the idea that there's nothing wrong with the law. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 8, the author of Hebrews says the same thing. There's nothing wrong with the first covenant. It's not like God screwed up and needed a mulligan. There was something wrong with us. We're broken and sinful and flawed. And we don't fix ourselves so well. We can't will ourselves to obey God at the level of perfection. So, yeah, Jesus is spot on, and this is in keeping with everything else the Bible teaches. Sin separates people from God. Full stop. You, me, and the society we're a part of are damaged. There are beautiful, redemptive things about you, me, and the society we're a part of because we're image bearers of God. But we're broken. We live in an imperfect world where we get stuff wrong. And as a result, you, me, and the society we live in are going to do stupid things. We're going to do things we regret. You, me, and the society we live in are also going to do stupid things that we didn't know were actually stupid. We're going to bullheadedly do stupid things and stand behind that and continue to persist in that because I'm owed and that's how things ought to be. It's an easy mistake to make when you're a flawed person living in a flawed world. So what the Bible teaches very simply is that brokenness is what creates the gap between us and God. That sin, that shortcoming, that imperfection. Now, one way to frame that up is just to say, you're naughty. You do bad stuff. Okay, all right. That's part of it. But another way to frame that up, which is equally as biblical, is to say, God's standard is perfection. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The second half of that verse from Romans chapter 3, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's some important language. It's not just that you swore a couple too many times and that's why God is better than you. But if you could just swear a little bit less and be a tiny bit more honest, maybe you'd get there. No, God's perfect. You're not getting there. There's no amount of not swearing that is going to get you to the right place. There's no amount of thinking the right thoughts or really controlling or curtailing your behavior. There's no amount of doing transcendently good, wonderful things that aren't trite that is going to get you there. Imperfect things cannot perfect themselves. It's physics. Tell me the exception. We know this to be true from the world around us, from nature, from reason, and we know it to be true from the mouth of God. The imperfect remains imperfect, full stop. But God is perfect. And God, through Christ, before our eyes, in this passage, is initiating a relationship with people. He's defining a relationship with people that sounds different. It sounds like there is hope. It sounds like God is up to something here, and he hasn't clarified it all yet, and we're going to have to keep working through this to get to those points. But this adds up. Because if there is to be any hope for you, me, and society, to get our stuff together, to make ourselves right, to get to a place that is right, it actually can't be ourselves doing it. It has to be an outside force acting upon us. If the perfect were to step into our imperfection and redeem it, well, that would be a very different situation. That's a possibility. There's hope in that. So what Jesus is simply saying is sin separates people from God. Sin has consequences. It's damaging. The law points out that sin, and this is the function of the basic laws of God. He takes it even a step further, and this is both a artful twist of the knife toward his enemies and a theological truth. For I tell you, verse 20, that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. He's not saying, like, well, okay, those are really good people. That's what you need to shoot for. Just be better than them. He's mocking them. He's saying these people would lead you to believe that their version of religion and their wonderful measure of self-control, their perfect, ideal social righteousness is what gives them their standing with people and God. And yeah, sure, other people could have this job if they were awesome, but Jesus, that was their attitude. And Jesus is taking this down a peg. He's saying, don't shoot for them. That's not the standard. You'd have to surpass even the most perfect people. He's mocking them. He's mocking the whole notion that your goodness could get to the place where it undoes the consequences of sin and our shortcomings before the law. And he's content to just let that thing sit there. Sin has consequences. Those consequences and sin in general are not resolvable by people through will or good behavior or lucky circumstances. We're broken. We're over a barrel. It's not fixable.
And how about that for a cliffhanger? Come back tomorrow for the final part of this talk. Thanks again for supporting this program. If you support the program at patreon.com/the TMBH And if you're just here to listen and you don't support, we're very grateful that you're here as well. We will finish off this talk tomorrow. We'll see you then. This has been the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast.